He thought it was just a friendly match. No cameras, no crowd, just a janitor in worn sneakers and a black belt who claimed it was all in good fun. But within minutes, the room would fall silent. What unfolded wasn't just a sparring session, it was a moment that ripped the mask off something far darker. This wasn't about martial arts, it was about power, prejudice, and the unspoken lines that still divide us. And by the end, nobody in that gym would see the world the same way again. Malik had never been the kind of man to draw attention. At 42, he'd spent most of his life working quietly, sweeping the same hallways and polishing the same trophy cases at the local sports complex. The athletes came and went, their names etched into plaques, their victories cheered. Malik was always in the background, unnoticed, except when something needed fixing. He loved the rhythm of it, the smell of fresh polish, the echo of sneakers on the court, the hum of fluorescent lights late at night. It was honest work. Safe work. At least, that's what he thought. Because one Friday afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the gym's high windows, a simple invitation would pull him into a moment he could never have imagined, a moment that would test not just his strength, but the very dignity he'd spent a lifetime protecting. The invitation had seemed harmless enough. A young man in a crisp white GI, Ethan, the black belt, approached Malik as he was mopping the gym floor. The sparring mats were still warm from the last training session. Just for fun, Ethan had said, with that easy smile people wear when they're convinced they're doing you a favor. Malik hesitated. He wasn't a fighter, never had been, but years of carrying heavy equipment, bending and lifting, had given him a quiet, functional strength. Ethan assured him it would be light, playful, nothing serious. The other martial arts students, mostly young and mostly white, drifted closer, forming an unspoken circle. Malik noticed their grins, not unkind, but not exactly friendly either. He stepped onto the mat, barefoot, feeling the odd vulnerability of being without shoes. The mop leaned against the wall like a witness. Ethan bowed formally, Malik awkwardly mimicked the gesture. The first few moves were easy. A slow jab, a sidestep, a laugh. But then something shifted. Ethan's blows came sharper, quicker. His eyes hardened, not with anger, but with something colder, the satisfaction of testing limits, of proving something. Malik stumbled under the force, catching himself just before he fell. The crowd laughed. Just a ripple at first. But Malik heard it, felt it. It wasn't the laughter of shared fun, it was the kind of laughter that says, we know exactly who you are and where you belong. He remembered being 12 years old, standing in the corner of a schoolyard, hearing that same kind of laughter. Back then, it had been because of his skin, his accent, his hand-me-down clothes. Now, decades later, here it was again. This time on a brightly lit mat, surrounded by people who called it sport. Ethan pressed harder. Malik felt a sharp kick graze his ribs. It wasn't devastating, but it was meant to sting. He saw the way Ethan's friends leaned in, waiting for him to crumble. One of them muttered something under his breath. Malik couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, mocking, diminishing. The hits kept coming, each one a little faster, a little harder. Malik's breath grew short, not just from the exertion but from the humiliation pooling in his chest. This wasn't a friendly match anymore, it was a demonstration. A reminder. Somewhere in the haze of sweat and bright lights, Malik caught Ethan's eyes. There was no malice there, at least, not the kind you could point to. Just a calm confidence, the kind that said, you can't win here, and you were never meant to. Malik's muscles ached. His mind flashed back to the small indignities that had piled up over the years, being followed in stores, called, sir, in that clipped tone that meant the opposite of respect, hearing jokes that always started with, no offense, but. The crowd clapped as Ethan landed another clean strike. Malik steadied himself, refusing to fall. He wasn't here to win, but he wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him broken. Then Ethan did something unexpected. He leaned in between movements, low enough for only Malik to hear, and whispered, you're stronger than you look, for a janitor. The word sliced sharper than any punch. Malik felt the blood rush to his face. He wanted to leave, to drop his guard and walk away, but he knew what that would look like, confirmation that the match, the laughter, the whisper, had been right about him all along. So he stayed. Each block, each counterstrike became not just about defense but about holding on to a piece of himself they couldn't take. By now, the students were restless. Some looked uneasy, shifting their weight as if they could feel the imbalance in the room. Others watched with gleeful fascination, like spectators at a show that had taken a darker turn. Malik's ribs burned. His legs trembled. But there was something else, something steadier, rising beneath the exhaustion. A quiet defiance. A voice inside that said, "Not today." Ethan moved in for what looked like the finishing blow, the kind that would send Malik sprawling. The crowd leaned forward. Malik's breath slowed. He saw the strike coming, faster, heavier than before, and in that split second, something changed. Instead of absorbing the hit, Malik stepped aside, redirecting the force with a motion that surprised even him. Ethan stumbled, catching himself just before falling. A collective gasp swept through the room. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Ethan's face flushed. The crowd's laughter stopped. Malik stood, chest heaving, eyes locked on Ethan, not in challenge, but in something deeper. A refusal. Ethan straightened, a smirk twitching at his lips, but there was a flicker in his eyes now, something like respect, or maybe irritation at having his script interrupted. The match wasn't over. But the tone had shifted. Malik could feel it. What he didn't know was that this single moment, this quiet refusal to play the part, would ignite something far beyond the walls of that gym. A chain of events was about to unfold, and by the time it ended, people who had never met Malik would be talking about him. Some would call him brave. Others would call him something far worse. Ethan adjusted his stance, shoulders squared, eyes locked on Malik. The air in the gym had shifted, no longer casual, no longer playful. Every movement now carried weight, a silent challenge that stretched far beyond the mat. Malik's breath came in ragged bursts, sweat stinging his eyes. His ribs throbbed from earlier hits, his legs heavy, but there was something stronger pushing through the fatigue, the need to stand his ground, to not let this end with him humiliated in front of people who would remember it for all the wrong reasons. Ethan feinted left, then came in hard with a spinning kick. Malik raised his arm in time, the impact reverberating down to his bones. He stumbled but didn't fall. A murmur rippled through the crowd, half disbelief, half irritation. Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted dominance. Malik could see it, feel it. This wasn't about a spar anymore, it was about putting him back in his place. The place where janitors stayed invisible, where strength wasn't supposed to belong to people like him. Then Ethan did something Malik didn't expect. He grabbed his GI collar and yanked him forward, whispering low enough for only Malik to hear. "You're making a fool of yourself. Quit before you embarrass yourself more." But the words didn't land the way Ethan thought they would. Instead of retreating, Malik felt his resolve sharpen like a blade. He remembered every time someone had spoken to him like that, at job interviews, at store counters, on sidewalks where people clutched their bags tighter. He didn't step back. He planted his feet. The next exchange was faster, sharper. Ethan drove a punch toward Malik's ribs. Malik blocked, countered with a shove that sent Ethan staggering 2 steps. Gasps rose from the circle. One young man muttered, "No way," under his breath. Ethan's face darkened. Pride had been pierced, and pride was dangerous. He lunged, throwing a flurry of strikes, harder now, reckless. Malik absorbed what he could, redirecting some, taking others. Pain flared in his side, his arm, his jaw. But every time he staggered, he came back to center. The crowd's energy shifted again, some now rooting for him, others watching with the uncomfortable realization that this wasn't supposed to happen. The janitor wasn't supposed to last this long. Then it happened. Ethan went for a takedown, wrapping Malik's legs in a sweeping motion meant to drop him to the mat. Malik, running on instinct and something deeper, shifted his weight and used Ethan's own momentum to send him sprawling onto his back. The sound of Ethan hitting the mat cracked through the gym. Silence followed, thick, electric. For a moment, neither of them moved. Ethan blinked up at the ceiling, chest rising and falling. Malik stood over him, breathing hard, the world narrowing to the space between them. Then, from the edge of the mat, someone laughed, not kindly, but sharply. "Guess the janitor showed you, huh?" The words shattered the silence. Ethan's eyes snapped to Malik, not with embarrassment this time, but with something more dangerous, anger. He rolled to his feet in one fluid motion. Before Malik could brace, Ethan launched forward, delivering a strike that wasn't controlled, wasn't sportsmanlike, it was meant to hurt. Malik felt the blow crash into his temple, a white-hot flash bursting behind his eyes. His knees buckled. The crowd gasped, but no one stepped in. No referee blew a whistle. This wasn't a regulated match anymore, it had slipped into something raw, primal. Malik's vision blurred, but through it he saw Ethan advancing again, shoulders hunched, fists clenched. Somewhere deep inside, a survival instinct flared. He raised his arms, deflecting one strike, then another. His body screamed in protest, but he refused to go down. Every second felt like an hour. The room seemed to tilt, the fluorescent lights glaring overhead. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Somewhere in the crowd, a phone camera clicked on. Ethan swung again. Malik ducked, stepped forward, and with the last of his strength, pushed Ethan back. The younger man stumbled, caught off guard by the resistance. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in that restless, chaotic noise people make when they realize they're seeing something they'll talk about later. Malik's chest heaved. He knew he couldn't last much longer, but he also knew something else. They'd all seen it now. They'd seen him stand against someone who was supposed to be untouchable. And that was the problem. Because Ethan's expression shifted, not just anger now, but something colder. Something calculating. He wasn't thinking about the spar anymore. He was thinking about how to restore the imbalance. How to remind everyone watching exactly who held the real power here. Malik didn't know yet what that would mean. But he was about to find out. Malik didn't remember the exact moment the match ended, only the sudden weight of silence in the gym. Ethan had stepped back, chest heaving, his expression unreadable. Someone muttered about calling it, and the circle around them loosened. No applause. No handshakes. Just a quiet, awkward dispersal, as if everyone wanted to slip away before acknowledging what had really happened. Malik walked to the corner, picked up his mop, and began gathering the scattered sweat and footprints from the mat. His hands trembled. Not just from exhaustion, but from the mix of emotions swirling inside him, humiliation, pride, anger, and something harder to name. In the days that followed, the story of the janitor who almost beat the black belt spread through the gym like wildfire. For some, it was told with a grin, like an amusing upset in a game that didn't matter. For others, it carried an edge, spoken in hushed tones, the unspoken message being that Malik had forgotten his place. He noticed the subtle changes. The way conversation stopped when he walked into a room. The sidelong glances from people he'd worked alongside for years. The way Ethan avoided him entirely, until the day he passed by and whispered, "Careful who you try to embarrass." That was when Malik understood, this hadn't ended on the mat. It never really does. Because for people like Ethan, a bruise heals, but for people like Malik, the reminder lingers, in every interaction, every shift in tone, every door that closes without explanation. He thought about quitting. Walking away from the job, the building, the people who'd seen him as nothing more than a prop in someone else's game. But then he thought about all the moments before this one, when he'd been told, directly or indirectly, that he didn't belong. Each time, he'd stayed. Not because he accepted it, but because leaving would mean letting them write the ending. So Malik stayed. And every day he walked into that gym, mop in hand, he carried himself a little taller. Not because the match had been a victory, it hadn't, but because he had refused to bow his head when it mattered most. But here's the truth, Malik's story isn't rare. It happens in gyms, in offices, in classrooms, on sidewalks, quiet battles fought every day by people who are told they're less, treated as less, and expected to stay in their place. And most of those battles never make it to video. The question isn't whether these moments happen, it's how many go unseen, how many end in silence because speaking up carries its own cost. Malik didn't win that day. But he also didn't lose the way they wanted him to. And sometimes, that's the quiet kind of victory that matters most. So ask yourself, if you'd been in that circle, would you have stepped in? Would you have called it out for what it was? Or would you have stayed quiet, letting the moment pass, knowing the story would be told without you? Because the fight against injustice doesn't just happen on the mat. It happens in the silence afterward, when you decide whether to speak, or to let the silence win.